New Zealand has condemned, as I said, Indonesia's execution of the Bali 9 ringleaders. Australians Andrew Chan and Muran Sukumaran were shot by firing squad yesterday morning. As you know, the pair were among 8 drug offenders killed. Now, in response, Australia has recalled its ambassador and is considering further sanctions. So you might expect New Zealand to take some action. But international diplomacy is a delicate game. It's a little like walking on eggshells. Prime Minister John Key spoke on this program last week about respecting Indonesia's right to set its own laws.
I think you have to respect, I know it's very difficult, but you have to respect the sovereign right of a country to set its own laws. We don't agree with the death penalty.
All right, with that in mind, can New Zealand condemn what's happened in Indonesia, particularly when we're cozying up to Saudi Arabia for a trade deal? With me now from Dunedin is Otago University Professor of International Relations, Robert Patman. Robert, morning to you. Great to have you with us again.
Thank you, Paul.
Can we very quickly start with Australia? Obviously, Tony Abbott coming under a lot of pressure by some to take a hard line on Indonesia. But as Indonesia knows themselves, it's a relationship that neither country can afford to ignore or not foster. So anything the Australians do will be marginal and temporary, won't it?
I think Australia does have to calibrate its action very carefully. It's clearly expressing its displeasure with Indonesia, but at the same time signalling by withdrawing the ambassador on a temporary basis that it seeks to see the relationship return to some sort of equilibrium in the near future. This is a very important economic relationship for Australia and Indonesia. It's about $15 billion a year in trade turnover, and the Australians are very nervous that should they go down the sanctions route or act in a more provocative way, then the Chinese will actually be in a place to capitalise on any deterioration in the relationship. The Chinese business community are very active in Indonesia.
As I suggested, walking on eggshells. So effectively, the Australians, it's nothing more than a token gesture.
I suppose it is, but at least I think Prime Minister Abbott and Foreign Minister Julie Bishop are trying to indicate that Australia is being true to its principles and of opposing the death penalty, and I suppose New Zealand as well. It's not always an ideal world that either Australia or New Zealand has to deal with, but they can at least get their point across. Particularly to a democratic regime in Indonesia.
All right, so let's talk New Zealand now, because we could be in the very same situation. There is a New Zealand citizen who is facing the same fate as the Bali 9, as those that were executed yesterday. We've got John Key officially saying, look, we do condemn what you're doing. We don't agree with the death penalty at all, but at the same time, we respect your sovereign right to run your country the way you run it. Simultaneously, of course, we're in Saudi Arabia trying to organise a trade deal. They kill more people than you can shake a stick at over there. We have to be consistent. We can't imagine sanctions on Indonesia, can we?
No, I don't think so. I think New Zealand's position is to express solidarity with Australia, which is clearly hurting at the moment. At least part of Australia is hurting over what's happened, the execution of the 8 drug smugglers. But, I mean, I think New Zealand would make a distinction between its relations with Saudi Arabia and that of Indonesia. Indonesia is part of our neighbourhood, it's part of the Asia Pacific. The trade with Indonesia is worth about $1.5 billion. We also have a substantial trade relationship with the Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia. But Saudi Arabia is not a democracy, and it's a relationship that we're developing. So I think Mr. Key could probably be more robust in expressing his disdain for the death penalty with respect to Indonesia than he possibly can in a developing relationship with Saudi Arabia.
All right, so what do you imagine we'll do? We know that Murray McCulley came out yesterday and really reiterated the words that John Key gave on this program the week before. New Zealand is strongly opposed to the death penalty in all cases and under all circumstances. That, would you imagine, is where we leave it?
I think so. I think Mr. McCulley and Mr. Key are very conscious that Anthony D. Malmanch, who is the New Zealand, who's currently facing drug charges, which of course could lead to the death penalty, they will probably want to make their point without putting the Indonesian authorities in a corner where they feel compelled to carry out the death penalty. In other words, they'll probably be applying a pressure to remind the Indonesian authorities that they should look to give a prison sentence rather than the death penalty, but at the same time giving them some wiggle room.
Yeah, brilliant. Robert, always good talking to you. Thank you for joining us. Robert Patman,
Thank you.
Otago University Professor of International Relations. Coming up on